The great hero and the demon lord starred in an epic battle. The demon lord tried to mock the hero by claiming that the world would end if he failed in his mission. The hero held a small rock and thought it was the only thing he had left to fight with. The demon lord unleashed all his power and threw a huge boulder toward the hero, but the protagonist countered it using his small pebble to destroy it completely. The hero was tired of small games and wished to end the clash definitively. The demon lord accepted the challenge and both pointed their swords at each other. Using their most powerful skills, the two engaged in a combat that lasted for years. After several clashes, both ended up exhausted to the point that the hair of the hero turned white. Moved by their desires, the two walked slowly forward and stabbed each other. Both collapsed, but the hero felt relieved that everything was finally over. Moving into the future, a young man is observed happy to join the school. He notices that the students greet each other and asks if that is what friends usually do. He feels relieved because that is what normal people are supposed to do. That young man is none other than Blade, the hero who defeated the Demon King, and he leaps with joy. He mentions that he will make friends and live like a normal person from that moment on. Blade walked cheerfully down the hallway, telling himself that it was time to make friends. He greets each random person he crosses paths with and notices that some students comment that he looks like a transfer student. He notices it and introduces his name to find out that they are called Kasim, Clay, Jessica, and Claire. He reveals that he is there to make friends, and the four accept his proposal. Blade is happy because now he has 4 friends, but his goal is to eventually have 100 friendships. Claire comments to him that to achieve that, he needs to make friends with all the students of the institution. Suddenly, a girl interrupts their conversation to ask why Blade is creating an unnecessary commotion. She says that they are all students of Rosewood Academy, an academy that trains heroes, so they must follow the rules and the established order. The group reveals that she is Ernest Flaming, the strongest student in the school, and she is known as the Empress. However, Blade simply introduces himself with a big smile. Ernest does not care and asks who he really is. Claire tries to explain the situation, but Ernest continues without paying attention and asserts that this school only admits people who want to be heroes, so they should not accept late admissions. Blade drops a surprise when he mentions that he does not care about becoming a hero, as he is only here to make friends. Ernest goes into a tantrum because he has no resolution to protect people. Blade does not flinch and asks her to take him to the office of the director. She shows him the way and knocks on the door. The director tells them to enter, and when Ernest sees the face of the director, she bows with deep respect. Blade does not care about that and speaks to the director in a casual tone. Ernest grabs him by the leg and calls him an idiot. She asks if he knows who the director is, and Blade answers affirmatively. Then she begins to beg the director to forgive the new student because he does not know that the director is actually King Gilgamesh. The king laughs and mentions that he heard about Ernest from the previous director, revealing that now he is the new director of the school. Ernest begins to praise the king as any loyal subordinate would do, but she almost never finishes flattering him with excessive servility. Fortunately, the king tells her that it is enough and that she must leave because he needs to speak with Blade in private. She leaves and gets angry because Blade treats the king like a casual friend. Blade then blames the king because he just turned her against him due to the whole situation. He asks the king what he is doing there, and the monarch reveals that Blade lost his powers after the fight with the demon lord, so he wants him to recover his hero skills. Blade gets upset because he wants to be a common person, but the king ignores him and labels this school simply as a rehabilitation center for him. The king continues to ignore Blade and explains that he will change the school curriculum because he wishes to create great heroes, just as Blade was. The young man tries to dismiss this as something unnecessary because the Demon King is dead. The king mentions the report about the last battle of Blade against the Demon King, which resulted in both losing their powers. However, he believes there is a way to restore the power of Blade. The young man remains quite upset because the king always acted this way, but decides to ignore him. Blade returns to class where everyone is doing their own activities. He notices Ernest and tries to talk to her. She asks him what he is doing in the S class. Blade explains that he took the exam for the F classes, but they told him to come here. She thinks that he bribed someone to get into the school and into the S class. She explains that this is not a school that admits people without determination and asserts that he cheated. Blade asserts that he is very serious in this school because he wants to make 100 friends. He begins to introduce himself to each person around him, stating that he wants to be their friend. Ernest gets annoyed by his actions, but he suddenly pats her head. She gets timid and tries to attack him with her sword, but Blade leaps quickly to dodge her attack. Another student named Sophie interrupts them to say that the instructor ordered them to gather. Blade introduces himself to her twice, but she only ignores him. Ernest then explains what he is doing, and the girl introduces herself as Sophie. Blade begins to shake her hand, but Ernest calls the instructor and says that she wants to test the ability of Blade. The teacher tries to stop it, but gives up after being intimidated. She pulls out an enchanted metal armor and says that each student of the S class can cut it easily. She says that he must also do it to prove his power or he must leave the academy. She tries to explain that the S class is on a different level compared to the remaining ones. Blade asks about how many levels they are talking. She answers that there are at least 3 levels above the rest. Blade feels slightly impressed and decides to use his second sword skill. He unleashes his fighting spirit spirit and impresses everyone around him. They notice that it is the spirit of the rarest and strongest dragon series. Blade accumulates the power around his sword and unleashes the Dragon Devourer skill. This is a wind skill that not only completely crushes the enchanted armor into dust, but also tears the clothes of Ernest and knocks all the students except Sophie against the wall. Ernest then returns and asks who on earth Blade is. After looking around, Blade notices what happened and apologizes, claiming that he is a common person. The class ends and it is lunchtime. Ernest is eating alone in her usual place. Blade decides to join her and calls his friends to join, but they all refuse. Ernest explains that that table is reserved for her, but he confuses the situation. He asks if she is being bullied, but she calls him an idiot and reveals that everyone is afraid of her. He wants to know why, but she ignores him. After tasting her food, Blade begins to eat as if he had never had a meal in his life. She is confused because it is only curry. However, she apologized for saying that he bribed someone to join the school. But Blade did not even remember that situation. She admits that he has some talent, but Blade is focused on his food. On the other hand, Blade thanks her because she helped him realize his dream of having friends. She is confused, but he tells her that since they are eating together, now they are friends. Ernest turns as red as a tomato and says that she does not mind being his friend. Later that night, Ernest returns to her room and reflects on his words. Initially, she calls him an idiot, but then begins to roll on her bed, happy to have managed to make her first friend. Suddenly, her sword begins to shake, making her remember her past. When she was younger, she immediately felt an attraction toward her sword. However, when she approached, the sword told her to surrender to it. Ernest fell before those words and picked up the weapon. Her hair changed from black to red, and since then, the sword has been filling her mind with words to destroy, cut, and burn. The sword repeats those words, but Ernest tells it to shut up. She is the next head of her family and will not yield to the demon sword. She manages to calm the sword and feels determined to become stronger. The next day, they continue their practice lessons, but she is upset because her opponent does not take the fight seriously. This guy is the type of womanizer who does not want a lady to get hurt. The guy then backs up to activate the power of his spear, which Blade thinks is amazing, and runs forward. Only to be thrown far away like Team Rocket, the guy puts on his handsome face and admits defeat. But suddenly, Ernest loses control and is about to take his life. She manages to stop the blow in time and asks for her next opponent. Sophie steps in and the two begin their battle. She manages to block the attacks of Ernest with her punches and even manages to push her back. Ernest is forced to use a fire skill and Sophie admits defeat. Then she calls Blade to fight her, but he is worried about her condition. She says she is fine and gets into a guard stance. However, suddenly she drops her sword and faints after feeling the weapon try to consume her. Blade manages to catch her in time and takes her to the infirmary. He tries to convince the doctor to make Ernest feel better, just as she did with him after defeating the demon lord, but she explains that she can do nothing against spells and curses. Ernest then wakes up, confused by what happened. Blade tries to explain, but she gets startled and tries to go out. Blade stops her and explains everything. Ernest wants to leave, but the doctor tells her to rest. Blade promises that he will take care of Ernest and will help her return. She says she can walk alone, but Blade tells her that she can lean on him because they are friends. But she simply tells him to keep what happened a secret and walks away. Blade then decides to infiltrate the data system of the academy to obtain information about her. He discovers that Ernest has the demon sword named Asmodeus. He decides to call her to speak in private. She misunderstands his intentions, thinking it is something romantic, but he says that he knows the secret of her sword. Outside, she explains that her sword gives her more power, but since the weapon has free will, the sword does not accept her as its master. He asks how that happened, and she explains that she found the sword when she was 6 years old, and that the sword tried to take over her body. Since then, she still tries to fight against the impulses of the sword. Blade then says that the only way to stop it is for the sword to recognize her as its owner, but she is afraid to try, because if she fails, the demon will take her body and finish off thousands of innocent people. However, Blade tells her that it is fine. She gets angry, but Blade tells her that he can handle it, and if necessary, he will destroy the sword. She decides to believe him and begins the ritual to form a pact. Blade observes her from the side while he sees flames surrounding her body. After finishing the chant, the demon sword increases the flames to test her. Ernest sees herself in front of the demon and orders it to submit to her. However, the demon refuses to surrender, forcing them to fight. The flames begin to generate a sort of small demons that wish to destroy everything. One of the demons tries to attack Blade, but he destroys it with his punch. After observing the scene, Ernest believes that Blade will take care of everything if she fails. She decides to give it her all and decides to go all out against the demon. The two clash with their powers, and with the support of Blade, she manages to win the battle and control the sword. Blade catches Ernest as she falls from the sky and congratulates her on succeeding. From that moment on, Ernest changed her habits. She begins to greet students with a smile instead of being in a bad mood. Everything thanks to her first friend Blade. The day continues as usual until class begins. Blade ends up practicing against two students but simply dodges each attack. Ernest approaches him and tells him to at least unsheath his sword against his colleagues. She also mentions that he disrespects them because he does not even look at them while he fights. But Blade simply answers that she looks different different. She acts in a flirtatious way, asking how she looks different to him. Blade thinks of all the moments when she was smiling and acting in a cute way until he simply answers that he does not know. Leonard begins to attack Blade while telling him to notice when a girl changes her hairstyle. Of course, Blade did not even notice it. Ernest reaches a level of discouragement that she says she did not want him to notice, but she returns to serious mode and tells Blade to keep an eye on Sophie. He notices that she is practicing alone and asks Ernest why it is like that. Ernest says that Sophie always practices on her own. She mentions that she usually obeys every order she receives, but she never did something she wanted except the time she told him her name. Ernest tells him to take care of Sophie while she orders Leonard to work harder. Blade goes with Sophie, introduces himself, and says that Ernest asked him to supervise her training. Sophie asks if that is an order. Blade ends up confused because that was not an order, but she asked him to do it. Even so, he simply smiles and says that he wants to help her. Sophie looks at her fists and says that that is all she can use. Blade asks with curiosity why she does not use weapons. She simply answers that they only taught her to use her body to fight. Blade promises to teach her other ways to fight. She asks if it is an order. Blade simply answers that he is trying to help a friend, and if she does not want to, she does not need to learn. She is curious about it and decides to try. Blade prepares to practice with her, but the bell rings, signaling that their practical training is over. Blade is nervous because they were about to begin. Ernest answers that it is because he was flirting. Sophie then looks at Blade and gives him a smile. In the next practical training class, Blade teaches Sophie how to use a sword, but she still cannot cut the armor. Blade tells her to channel her fighting spirit into the sword just as she does with her fists. He tells her that a sword is just an extension of her body while making a demonstration. She understands it easily and manages to cut the armor. Blade says that if she keeps it up, she will be able to use the sword. He decides to call it a day, but Sophie asks if she will defeat Ernest. Blade answers that reaching the level of Ernest will not be easy. Suddenly, Sophie returns the sword to Blade. He grabs it, but Sophie grabs him and throws him to the ground the next second. She sits on top of him to hold him down and says that this way she is stronger. Blade agrees and says that he cannot move. She answers, while bringing her face closer, that she would not be in a good mounted position if the enemy could move freely. Blade agrees, and she tells him that she wants to learn something else from him tomorrow. Blade promises that he will do it, but first, he must visit the director of the school. If you do not remember him, King Gilgamesh. The king asks how school life is going, to which Blade answers that he made some friends. The king feels relieved because Blade became the hero when he was only 3 years old. Do not ask me how. At this point, the king even considers Blade his best friend, but Blade wants to be friends with people his age. The king is curious and asks who the friends of Blade are. Blade mentions that lately, he has been closer to Sophie. The king is not surprised. He already expected Blade to be interested in her. The two comment on how strong she is, but the king asserts that she is still incomplete. Blade is confused, but the king explains that her goal for her complete form was to surpass Blade. Blade gets angry and asks what this is about. The king mocks him for making friends with her without knowing that she was part of the project of the great artificial hero. Blade is once again confused. The king explains that if Blade, the great hero, can exist, then there is also the possibility of creating a great artificial hero like him. Basically, he explains that there is a certain group that used ancient forbidden knowledge to create an artificial hero. They took a test subject with the best aptitude and tried to artificially manifest the powers of the great hero. To make matters worse, they created several clones of her for that experiment, and they used them to make new experiments and adjustments. Blade is confused about the clones because he thought they were talking about Sophie. The king reveals that the real name of Sophie is Sophicia Femto. Femto means 12, which means that she is the 12th clone of Sophicia. The eyes of Blade shake because he cannot believe the truth. The king continues saying that the original Sophicia was treated as an object to experiment on. Blade gets up angrily, but the king explains that he was not involved. Furthermore, he wiped out that organization. Blade calms down, but the king explains the moment when he met Sophie. He took her in and told her that she was free, but she also asked if that was an order, something that has not changed since then. Blade returns running and blames himself because Sophie was robbed of a normal life because they wanted to create a great hero. But now, he is determined to make sure that she gets her normal life back. The problem is that he does not know what is in a normal life either. He goes to the infirmary to talk to his doctor friend, who is more interested in seeing his body. He asks her what normal means and what is normal for a boy his age. She is happy that he is curious and is willing to teach him everything related to the vigor of youth, and he was glad to have misunderstood her words because I would not. He goes with Leonard and asks him what youth means and what it implies. Leonard is also naive and answers that it means love. Blade runs out and asks his colleagues what love is and what they do when they are in love. One of them answers that love consists of having dates together. As you will guess, it is time for the next victim. He goes to the room of Ernest and asks her about dates. She misunderstands the whole situation, but at the insistence of Blade, she answers that they are couples who spend time alone. They talk, walk, and go shopping. But despite being happily timid about it, she says it is too early for them to have a date. Blade storms off saying that he will have a date. Of course, Ernest wants to know who the girl is that is stealing her spot. While looking for Sophie, Blade enters the girl's bathroom and asks Sophie for a date. She asks if that is an order. It is not, but he tells her that that is important. She smiles and accepts. Of course, the girls, including Ernest, decide to spy on the two while mentioning what happened. The girls keep calling Ernest the Empress, and she tells them to simply call her Ernest. The girls refuse, but Ernest explains that they are comrades united with a single goal, keeping an eye on Blade and preventing him from doing strange things. I wonder what she means by that. Sophie arrives at the meeting place on time and tells Blade that she has no idea what a date is. Blade answers not to worry because he has it all planned out. Of course, his schedule sounds more like a mission briefing. The girls think this is too detailed and that it really looks like a date. Sophie grabs hold of his arm and they begin to walk. Ernest and the girls do not like that interaction and end up losing them. It turns out that Blade planned to walk around town, eating ice cream, visiting some places, running, and even feeding the fish. Then they go to an arcade to play the punching game. Ernest and the girls are quite jealous and want to stop them. Why do you ask? Because they destroy the darn machine. Blade becomes a bit more romantic, and the two have to drink from the same fruit at the same time with their straws. But since it is difficult to sip, Sophie asks him to get closer to her. Suddenly, Blade leaps away when their faces touch. She asks him what is wrong, but he does not understand. Sophie tells him that she cannot complete the mission of finishing the drink on her own. He answers that he understands, but his heart is going faster than a race car. They approach each other timidly to finish the drink, and Sophie tells him to come closer. The heart of Blade is reaching its limit. But Ernest and the girls are upset because they have not been noticed despite sitting a table away. The mind of Ernest is also racing, upset to see them close. After moving forward with their date, Blade finally begins to feel that someone is following them. They keep ignoring it and try to move forward with their activities. But Blade notices that they are a bit late. Sophie says it is fine and that they will take a shortcut. And by that, I mean climbing a building and then jumping between the buildings of the town. Then they end the date sitting by a fountain, where Sophie reveals that she had fun today. Then she asks why he decided to invite her on a date. He wants to tell the truth but cannot, so he answers that it is because she is his friend. Sophie asks if they really are friends because friends do not keep secrets from each other. Blade thinks he was found out, but then she says that she has not told him something. She decides to reveal to him that she is not a normal human being. She explains the whole story of the incomplete test subject and shows the power she obtained from it. She says that the true hero can change the laws of physics, but she cannot control the power. She falls and says that she wanted to increase her body weight 1,000 times, but since she cannot control her power, she actually increased it 10,000 times. She also reveals that she can stop time, but can only use the hero powers for 10 seconds. After hearing her whole story, Blade tells her that he will not keep any secrets from her either. She wants to hear it, and Blade reveals that they used to call him the Great Hero. Sophie does not answer, and Blade explains that he lost his powers. As she is in silence, he asks if she already knew it. She answered that no, but that she felt something familiar coming from him. He apologizes to her because he is the reason she became a test subject for this cursed power and lost her normal life. Sophie does not understand the curse part. Blade explains that the power of the hero is a curse. He never wanted to be the great hero, but he had no choice but to fight because they told him he could use the power to save people. He began to fight monsters when he was only 3 years old. That was the moment when his powers awakened. He became strong and almost died several times, but there were still people he could not save. People got angry with him when he could not save their loved ones. Blade begins to cry, and Sophie runs to him to comfort him. She says that even if he did not want to be, he was still the great hero. She reveals that after being rescued by the king, she undertook a journey to discover who she was. She mentions all the cities he saved and all the people he also saved. He holds her tightly while she tells him to be proud. He says that that is impossible, but Sophie answers that she is proud to have participated in the experiment of the great artificial hero because she wants to become someone like him. After hearing those words, Blade decides that he will no longer be haunted by his past. The two take each other by the hand and promise that they will keep their real identity a secret. Blade and his classmates were enjoying their lunch in the cafeteria when Ernest mentions that Blade had food all over his face. Sophie kindly helped clean his face, which made Ernest complain out of jealousy. Their new friends arrive and ask if they can join them. They end up joining them, and one of the girls asks for the opinion of Blade on their outfits. Blade is confused, but Ernest interrupts and congratulates the group for being promoted from class to their class. Blade remains confused, and the students mention that only S-rank students can dress freely. The girl asks again what Blade thinks, but he thinks that she is cold in that outfit. Of course, Leonard is here to hit on girls and does his best. Ernest tells him to stay down and asks if Blade knew the news. The king will bring a magical beast to the school to improve training. Blade does not care, which surprises Ernest. He mentions that he could expect nothing less from the old king. Suddenly, the ground begins to shake, which causes the students to panic. Sophie tells Blade that they must take everyone to the shelter, but he runs out with his plate still in hand. They find a dragon, and Blade asks if that is a magical beast. Blade walks slowly forward, and the dragon moves toward him after seeing him. Ernest prepared to fight, but Sophie stopped her. Blade then suddenly leaps into the air and knocks down the dragon with a punch, while telling it to sit. Ernest cannot understand what is happening. How did Blade deal with the dragon with a single punch? He answers that this dragon is still young and must have been afraid while being dragged all the way here. He asks if the dragon is hungry and throws his plate inside its mouth, but it is too spicy for the dragon, and Blade laughs. The students were amazed by the ability of Blade to pacify the dragon with a single blow. Blade tried to downplay it, mentioning that this is normal and that anyone could do it. Nobody believed him. He says that it is not a big dragon nor an ancient one, it is just a baby dragon. Everyone backed up, scared of him, when the dragon suddenly begins to glow. Ernest tells Blade to look back, where he sees a small girl. She leaps on him, calling him father, but Blade does not understand. She claims that she has been looking for him and that now she wants to play. Blade answers that he is not her father, but that he will help her find her parents later. Then he asks Ernest where the dragon went. She tries to explain that the dragon became that girl, but he says that that is impossible. Despite the attempts of Blade to convince her otherwise, the girl persisted in her belief that he was her father. Ernest explained that the dragon had transformed into the girl, and Sophie confirmed it, finally convincing Blade. The girl leaped on him, and he asks why she calls him father. She ignores his question, mentioning that his punch is amazing and that she could expect nothing less from her father. She clings to him, asking to play, and Blade does not know what to do. So they decided to let Blade take care of her to prevent her from causing havoc. While bathing her, the girl, whom he named Coup, asked why he gave her that name. Blade explained that he chose it for a strong knight who always kept his promises. This pleased Coup because dragons also keep a promise, even if it costs them their lives. Ernest interrupted the bath and got timid after seeing his chest. He asks if she learned anything about the girl. She mentions that magical beasts like dragons are creatures that seek strength. Once they are defeated, their flesh decomposes, but they leave a fragment of their soul with their knowledge. That fragment then can incarnate as another entity and copies the form of the being that defeated them. In short, Blade concludes that a dragon can take human form if it is defeated by a human. Ernest explains that it is rare because most humans cannot defeat a dragon. Blade realizes that she is talking about his strength and wondered if Coup had been defeated by a human in her past life. Ernest realizes that Blade decided to name the dragon. The girl revealed herself, mentioning that she likes her name. Ernest sees that Blade was showering with Coup and kicks his face while calling him a pervert. The next day, Ernest was still upset, especially because Coup was sitting on the lap of Blade. Coup asked him to feed her, and Blade did so. Coup mentions that she is capable of feeding herself, but that being fed by Blade makes it taste better. Claire thinks that Coup is cute and tries to feed her, but Coup turns aggressive, mentioning that she will not be friends with weak humans. Blade tells Coup that she scared Claire, but Coup answers that he should only pay attention to her, his daughter. She mentions that he must give her a good morning kiss, and she must sit on his lap for him to feed her during mealtime, to which he agrees. All the girls are surprised and ask if Blade kisses her in the morning. He mentions that he never did. Coup then mentions that Blade spends his time looking at mature female bodies, which she thinks is unacceptable. The girls take this seriously and confront him, and the boys betray him. They claim that he is guilty and punish him by leaving him alone during training. Ernest recommended that her classmates not worry about him. Blade then notices Coup passing by and asks if she wants to join him. She joins happily, mentioning that she does not need to train, but since he asked her to, she will show her power. The group that just joined their class was told to partner with Blade. Jessica said she wanted to become a spy and asked who could teach her. Blade recommended Sophie, but Coup felt that he was ignoring her and left. He tries to call her, but she already disappeared. Coup was walking through the school and noticed a group of students training. They asked if she wanted to join them and make friends, but Coup answered that they were too weak to fight against her. She ran out and bumped into Blade. He noticed that she was feeling discouraged and asked what was wrong. She dismissed it and told him that she was hungry. He told her that they were going to eat curry. She hugged him and said that he knew her too well. After their meal, Blade observes Coup fall asleep. He touches her face and she holds his finger. Ernest knocks on his door and the two go out. He explains to her that dragons are tormented by their parents when they are bored. They only do that because the child only recognizes its parents due to their strength. Ernest asks if that is the reason why Coup behaves like that. He answers that Coup has been alone since she was born. Ernest tells him that he cannot pretend to be the father of Coup any longer. Blade agrees, but fears that Coup will end up truly alone in the world. He asks if Ernest knows how much it hurts to be alone. She then realizes what he is trying to say, and now knows that Blade is serious when he decided to take care of Coup. Then he asks if Sophie is quiet, revealing that she was listening to everything. Ernest and Sophie were worried about him, and Blade says that things are going well with Coup. The girls return to avoid scandalous rumors. But when Blade enters his room, he notices that Coup is not there. He goes to the roof and asks her what is wrong. Coup answers that looking at the moons calms her. She sees them as representations of father and child. Blade understands what is happening and asks if she does not want to make friends. Coup says that he is wrong because dragons are stronger than humans, both physically and mentally. Dragons did not form friendships and live and die alone. She does not need friends. She only needs her father, Blade. Blade jokes and says that she is really strong. The next day, Blade tried to get the king to take care of Coup, but it did not go as planned. The king scared Coup and she ran away, leaving Blade frustrated with the antics of the king. Blade returned to his room and heard the voice of Coup. He looked inside to see her playing with toys and representing a drama with them. He noticed that each toy imitated a personality of one of his friends. The game of Coup portrayed Blade seeking the friendship of everyone for her sake. Then she begins to mention names of students with whom Blade never spoke. He realizes that those are the other students they passed while walking. The toy named Blade then mentions that his daughter managed to make 108 friends. Blade realizes that Coup wishes to have friends but claims that she does not have them. He walks away, disappointed that he never realized. Ernest approached him and offered him help to look for Coup, but she was stunned when Blade began to hit his head against the wall repeatedly. She stopped him and asked him what was wrong with him. Blade explained that it was difficult for Coup to make friends because dragons did not see weaker beings as equals. To be friends with Coup, they would have to defeat her in a fight. He felt helpless to help Coup find the friendship she desired. Ernest urged Blade to trust her and the others instead of trying to handle everything on his own. They headed to meet with the lower classes and ask for their help in the fight. Blade spoke about Coup, explaining her desire to make friends with them and asking for their help to defeat her. But the students knew they could not defeat a dragon. Blade begged on his knees for them to become friends with Coup, and Ernest repeated his actions. The remaining students of the S-class also arrive and beg on their knees. They want Coup to finally get some friends. The students could not believe their eyes and ended up accepting the request. The next day, everyone waited for the arrival of Coup at the arena. She arrives in her dragon form and notices the king observing from afar, enjoying the scene. The secretary asks if a dragon will recognize defeat if it is brought down by a large group, but the king thinks so because dragons know that humans work together. The king feels sad because Blade will not join the fight, but Blade almost tells Coup that it is fine if she burns the king into crunchy royal bacon. Then he pats her head and mentions that she could not fight when she was captured due to a trap. But this time there are no traps. She can show everyone her strength. She exhales fire and everyone prepares to begin the battle. But of course, the students begin to flee when Coup uses her fire breath and her tail. Ernest uses her broken sword to hit Coup and yells at the students to remember their plan. Somehow they regain their senses and follow the strategy. They surround Coup on all sides and dodge the attack of the tail. Well, some do, giving the long-range weapon squad the opportunity to attack. Blade is excited because the plan seems to work, while the king has fun. Ernest orders the long-range squad to attack when the other squad backs up. The students combine their attacks to hit Coup on all sides. The secretary of the king ends up impressed by the students attacking from the blind spots of Coup. The king thinks that they are working well together, but there is a problem. Ordinary attacks cannot damage a dragon. Blade begins to worry, but Coup is not holding back. Some students are already calling emergency while others prepare their farewell. Coup uses fire while also hitting hard. The king feels that Blade is waiting for something, but he mentions that the battle will end before that. Coup attacks a group with fire, but they dodge. Blade yells that this is their chance. Sophie takes this opportunity to run and hit Coup hard. Meanwhile, Ernest uses her magical sword to deal a fire attack. The king is impressed, mentioning that they finally caused some damage, but the plan of Blade still failed. However, Blade mentions that this is enough because Coup lost awareness of her surroundings. The ground suddenly seems to break, and Coup ends up being pinned against the ground. The king does not understand. He thought they were fighting fairly. Blade mentions that they are fighting fairly because the trap was placed during the battle, not before. It turns out that Leonard was the one who dug a hole after the battle began. The king realizes that the students have been buying time, but it is still not enough to win. Blade already knows it and mentions that the true battle will begin. The students charge forward, and Coup tries to stop them by exhaling fire. Ernest uses her sword Asmodeus again, but the weapon initially refuses because it is getting weaker. She calls it a coward and uses the fire once more to attack Coup. Leonard finally joins the fight, but the scales of Coup are so strong that he goes flying backward. But this guy does not get the timing right. Literally, he is trying to flirt with Ernest at this moment, mentioning that he has been running 10 miles a day every day as she asked him. Ernest does not even remember that. Forget about that guy. Because Coup begins to fly to get out of that situation. Ernest attacks again to force Coup down, and Sophie hits her with her artificial hero gravity manipulation skill to pin Coup down. The king now gets excited again, and Blade yells that this is the right moment. Everyone is tired to the extreme, and Ernest complains that he is making them work hard. She asks for more power from her sword, which is shaking because it cannot hold anymore. But Ernest does not care. The sword begins to channel all its power. The king is impressed because he did not know there was such a capable student in his school. But Blade explains that it is not just the powers of Ernest. He mentions that most people are weak like ants, but with every student, they can share their power with Ernest to give her a greater power. All the students mention that they want to make friends with Coup and ask Ernest to give her a beating. After channeling all her power, Ernest attacks Coup, creating a huge explosion. Meanwhile, Blade tells Coup to observe well because those are the powers that humans have. Coup returns to her human form and seems to be not only exhausted but also traumatized. She is crying because she lost, but Blade comes to pat her head and comfort her. She apologized for disappointing him with her defeat. She thinks that he will abandon her for being weak just as dragons do, but Blade mentions that he will not abandon her and corrects her. She is not weak. She only lost because humans were stronger. Following his instructions, she ends up accepting defeat, and Blade asks if she can be friends with everyone. She reveals her attitude, answering that if they insist so much, she will become their friend. However, Blade gives her a tap on the head and she timidly asks everyone to become her friends. Everyone smiles and accepts it. In the aftermath, the secretary asks the king what he is up to. He simply answers that he wants his students to grow. But with this demonstration, now he wants to take a series of new training methods. Basically, he got a type of virtual reality magic made by what everyone loves, science. And now he is trying to incorporate it into the school. Since that last fight, everyone became close friends with Coup. Now she sits on the lap of the others, and Claire tries to feed her. Of course, those two together look very strange. While they eat, Blade notices something and asks Ernest if there is something different about her. You will realize the mistake he just made after looking at her. Everyone gets startled and tries to shut him up, mentioning that he cannot say that. Sophie even calls him despicable, while the others mention that she is no different. What on earth do you mean that she is no different? She was an attractive classmate, and now it looks like she ate the dragon form of Q. Leonard tries to be the good guy, but Blade is direct. He calls her by the fat word. Ernest begins to cry. Well, I guess it was not the fat word. Probably he called her a whale. She cannot take it anymore and runs while crying. They say that that was a considerable earthquake. Everyone proclaims Blade guilty, but since he has no common sense, he does not understand it. Blade ends up being quite depressed during the next few days because Ernest did not leave her room. Q tried to comfort him, but it was not enough. The girls mention that Ernest might even stop being his friend. Blade gets scared. He wants to be her friend. He asks the girls if Ernest would forgive him if he apologized. He tries to run to her room, but Claire stops him. She asks if Blade does not know why Ernest is angry with him. To be fair, if it is not that, even I do not know. Claire mentions that Blade will probably make Ernest even angrier, so the girls accompany him. They knock on the door of Ernest and tell her that Blade came to apologize, but there is no answer. They pick the lock of the door and enter the dark room of Ernest. They see her on the floor. It looks like she is crying. They ask if she is okay, but Coup has a different reaction. She mentions that it looks tasty and asks for some. When the group turns on the light, they discover that Ernest was stuffing herself with 3 boxes of cakes. She even tells them not to look at her. Imagine the audacity. She says the desserts are tasty, and Blade calls them the culprit. Ernest then explains that she has been feeling hungry all the time since her last fight with Coup, and it seems that she never realized that delicious cakes existed before. Blade is more interested in what really matters. He asks if she wants to burn some hot calories. Okay, he did not. He asked if they were still friends. She answers that she did not want him to see her like this. To be fair, I do not think anyone wants to. Since everything is fine, Blade says great, then he leaves. Claire and Jessica stop him and tell him that if he leaves, Ernest will become a lost cause. Therefore, he needs to say something nice and things like that, you know, tell a lie. He catches the idea and only makes it worse, telling Ernest that it is good that she is enjoying the food. He is a lost cause, and Jessica begs Leonard for his help. As expected, this guy tries to flirt with Ernest while mentioning that he is too poor to pay the bill at her restaurant. Blade learns from him and yields to his flirtatious personality. He grabs the shoulder of Ernest and asks if this is something she cannot deal with alone. He tells her that she should ask for help from them, who will train her. Ernest cries and feels motivated to take another bite of that donut. The only problem is that the large lady can no longer exercise properly. She runs with Blade and Coup, but at this point, if they stop moving, they will go at the same speed as her. They continue with various exercises with Blade and Coup, trying to motivate her, but she is too weak. To make matters worse, her special diet food is literally half an egg, 2 broccolis, and a small fish. The girls around her are eating full plates and tell her to reduce her calories. She even tries to burn some fat later in the sauna, but cannot take it anymore. When she comes out, the girls are ready to weigh them. She gets on top and crushes it. It turns out she did not lose weight, she gained more. Blade is curious to know the result, but the girls knock him unconscious. Jessica tells Ernest that she must have gained muscle from the training because that is exactly what happens. Claire then begins to have the right ideas, like finding a way to increase her metabolic rate. That gives Ernest an idea, so she asks for the help of Blade because she wants to try something a bit drastic. She gives him a sword and explains that they need to use the testing grounds because it is protected by a magical barrier. She pulls out her sword Asmodeus and asks if Blade can praise her if she manages to pull this off and lose some weight. Blade answers yes, and she fills with motivation. She tells him that she will count on him if anything happens, and he says sure. She then channels all her power into her sword and orders it to consume her body. The sword surrounds her with huge flames. Her friends notice the big fire and come, mentioning that they have been looking for them. Jessica asks if that is Ernest, and Blade tells everyone to have faith in her. Suddenly, the fire goes down and the body of Ernest is thin again. The only problem is that she has a pair of horns and black eyes, not to mention that her new intimate attire is made of fire. It turns out that Asmodeus took this opportunity to take over her body, and now it is prepared to destroy the world. That is until Ernest speaks back to the demon, explaining that she only gave it the body fat, not her body, all for the sake of her diet. The demon thinks about it and realizes that this demonic form consumes too much energy. It takes 1,000,000 calories to maintain it for an hour, which makes Ernest happy until she gets dizzy and collapses because she is hungry. She reaches beast mode and even grows a tail. Claire tells her not to lose her humanity, but Ernest runs to attack her. Blade Blade steps forward and uses his wind skill to stop the fire and return Ernest to normal. Later, she wakes up in his arms and he tells her that she did great. They return to their normal lives until they go to the room of Ernest because she has been missing all day, only to discover that once again she is overeating. A few days later, Blade returns to the infirmary to be examined by the doctor. She tells him that he is recovering slowly, around 30%. He is curious to know if he can use his hero powers again, but she explains that he will die if he uses 30% of his total power. He leaves the office and walks through the school and hears Claire calling him. She wants to introduce him to her friend Maria, but Blade interrupts her because he remembers that she was part of the magical unit when the students fought against Coup. But as you will guess, Blade is a very considerate person, mentioning that Maria tripped all the time during training and threw her magical spells in the wrong direction. Literally, this guy is becoming a pure stalker. She accepts her fate, mentioning that she is clumsy, but Claire mentions that Maria has a favor to ask him. It turns out that this girl wants Blade to take her life. Well, she explains that she is not human and wants Blade to kill her if she somehow loses control. Everyone is surprised. However, Blade simply confirms that she is a night demon. Yes, Blade already knew it. She reveals her pointed ears while saying that there is something else inside her. No, it is not what you are thinking. It is just a magical beast. I think this does not make it better either. So yes, that thing is powerful and her British leaf water cup breaks magically. She apologizes worriedly, mentioning that she cannot control her strength. Claire tries to calm her down, but she explains that she has been losing control of herself since she fought against Coup. The only problem is that she has nowhere to go if they expel her from the academy. Claire explains that they came from the same school and that the parents of Maria are gone. That is why Maria wants to deal with those powers to find a place where she belongs. Blade accepts for a reason. He wants to deal with her inner thing. Okay, now seriously, he has no parents. Sophie and Coup join in, and they will probably create the school orphans club, but the rest also join, including Ernest, who, as you will have noticed, now is thin again. Now all those children in Africa can eat again. Their plan is to go to the training field, establish a barrier and those things. Blade wants Maria to release her power so that she can learn to enjoy her control. She refuses to do it, but he explains that if Ernest could do it, she can too. After some encouragement from Ernest, she ends up putting her faith in Blade. First, she drops a bracelet, which ends up reducing her power by half. It really hits the ground until they notice that there are 3 more, and a necklace that reduces her power by 10. This girl is literally the demon lord. Ernest realizes that they are in deep trouble and tries to stop her. Too late, the power of Maria is unleashed, and she gets scared because someone is coming out. Blade tells her to trust them, and she smiles before transforming into what looks like a succubus, but it turns out she is the true demon lord. The demon lord laughs, ordering them to kneel and all those things. Yes, Mom, that is to say she is celebrating her rebirth because she will control the world and those things. Sophie asks if that is really the demon lord. Blade tells her no, but the emblem on her head says otherwise. Ernest quickly pulls out her demon sword and transforms into a demon to attack Maria, but the demon lord quickly deals with her. Leonard steps forward only to meet the same fate. Sophie decides to jump on her back and use supreme gravity to bring her down, while Coup uses a fire spell in her dragon form. Sophie collapses after exhausting all her magical power to hold her, and Coup launches her attack, but the demon lord stops it with her hand, turns it into a crystal, and throws it back. After seeing all his comrades collapse, Blade grabs his sword and runs to hit her. The demon lord is confused because he never drew his sword and asks if he is trying to capture her alive. She thinks he is a funny guy and tells him to fight seriously or she will kill him. She uses a wind spell to fling him against the barrier and says that she will kill him if he does not take it seriously. Blade knows that he is still recovering but cannot give up yet. He finally decides to take it seriously, but she manages to stop his attacks with her bare hands. He backs up and she uses a fire spell asking him not to die right away. He uses his sword to block the attack, but his blade ends up destroyed. Ernest gets up, showing how attractive she can be. I mean, she tells him to use her demon sword to fight against the demon lord. Asmodeus tells him that it does not want to do it, but since Ernest ordered it, it does not have many choices. The demon lord thinks that now she will have a fun fight, but Blade could not care less. His goal is to finish with his next blow. She mocks his words and tells him to show her what he can do. Blade channels his power, but Asmodeus tells him to stop because it cannot handle the immense power of Blade. Of course, Blade ignores it and uses all his power against the demon lord. She manages to block it with a barrier, thinking that it was too simple until she notices that her spell breaks. She cannot believe her eyes, and Blade manages to defeat her with all his power. He is happy that nobody ended up dying, but soon collapses. Later, he wakes up in the office of the nurse where the doctor hugs him quickly while calling him an idiot. Despite being injured, he is enjoying life. She asks him why he always makes her worry about him and explains that he died for a few seconds. If she had not arrived on time, he would never wake up again. She calls him a liar because he promised that he would never make her cry again, but he failed. He apologizes and asks about the others. The doctor reveals that everyone is safe and that Claire is treating them. Then he asks about Maria, who is also alive. A day later, everything returns to normal. Well, not everything. It turns out that Maria is still in her demon lord form. She greets Blade as the hero, but he tries to shut her up. Now she has something to use against him in the future, and Blade tells Maria that she should stop. Then he explains explains that Maria is a different personality, and Blade asks the Demon Lord for her name, but she was never given one. Blade decides to consult with the king, who reveals that he was aware of the identity of Maria. He explains that the mother of Maria was human, and her father is the previous Demon Lord, the one whom Blade defeated. The daughter of the Demon Lord adapted quickly to her new life, especially because she claims to be an ordinary young woman. Jessica complains, mentioning that she only wants to wear cute clothes. However, the daughter of the Demon Lord simply shows off before the boys. The students began to call her Mao, and she says that someday she wants a rematch against Blade. She heads to class, and Claire worries that she will never see Maria again. At night, Mao knocks on the window of Blade while Coup is sleeping. She wants to invite him on a date and grabs him to make him fly. She keeps calling him the great hero and mentions that Maria spent most of her time looking at the moon. Blade asks how old she is, and she mentions that she gained self-awareness 5 years ago. Blade is confused because she is 5 years old, but she explains that magical beasts do not care about age. She takes him to the roof, saying that a lady does not want to be treated like a child. Blade is confused with the lady part, and she says if he cannot see it. As you know, Blade is too naive to understand it. She feels bad because she feels attached to him, but he does not notice her. Then she reveals that she only stayed in this school because of him. He thought that she was enjoying her school life, which she also admits, but mentions that a magical beast always seeks strength. She admits to being attached to him, but does not understand why, especially because she feels that he is weaker than he was in the past days. Blade reveals that if he uses 15% of his power, he will die. She then says that he is not worthy of her taking his life right now, but she will not leave this school until she achieves it. She takes his hand and reveals that she has been thinking about the theory that maybe she loves him. Blade is confused, but she says that it is just a possibility. She just wants to test it. She blushes while taking his hand and asks if he wants to be her partner. However, Blade is too young, naive, and innocent to understand what it means. It turns out that she does not either because she is 5 years old. Blade thinks that it would be easier for them to go to the testing ground and fight each other until they are satisfied. She refuses due to his current condition. Furthermore, she cannot take off the necklace that restricts her power. She explains that the consciousness of Maria is still inside her and prevents her from taking it off. Blade asks about Maria, and Mao explains that she is hidden in the deepest parts of her mind. She mentions that the heart of Maria is full of dark shadows due to her past. She was feared and bullied by humans while she was still a child, and she was forced to hide with her mother, who always believed that her husband would return. But Maria never believed that her father would come back. Eventually, her mother died, and the mind of Maria was filled with doubts. She thought that her father never loved her mother and abandoned them. She thought that the Demon Lord was the reason for her suffering. That was when Mao was born. As a way to escape the pain that Maria always felt, she says that Maria may never appear again. However, she explains that she only told him this because Blade is closer to a demon than to humanity, something that she likes about him. Blade calls it something of the past, and they return to their rooms. A few days later, they studied the necklace of Mao, only to discover that it is not a sealing object. Mao explains that she is being restricted by the necklace, and Blade asks for more information about it. Eliza, the one who performs the research, mentions that it looks like some kind of recording device. Basically, that necklace has some kind of message for Maria. Mao mentions that Maria received it from her mother. However, Eliza mentions that the recorded message could bring Maria back and destroy the Demon Lord. Despite the possibilities, Mao decides to accept playing the message because she cares about Maria. Eliza uses a spell to activate the recording, and Claire mentions that they could have become friends if Maria and Mao stayed alive. Mao mentions that those who remain will be her friends. Eliza orders Mao to open the necklace, and it projects an image of the previous Demon Lord. The Demon Lord initially tries to apologize for leaving Maria and her mother because he had to fight the great hero. He did not want them to follow him down a path filled with blood. He left the mother of Maria when he noticed she was pregnant. He had already decided on the name for the girl and ordered the mother of Maria to tell the girl that he was dead. Mao finds Maria deep in her mind and asks how long she will be hidden. Maria takes the hand of Mao, and they listen to the message from her father, revealing that he will love Maria and her mother forever. Mao begins to cry, revealing that she cannot control her body because Maria is also crying in her mind. She mentions that she and Maria are fighting to see who manages to survive, and that Maria is about to destroy her. Mao tells the group to call out the name of Maria, and the group follows the instructions. Mao loses consciousness and falls to her knees, and Maria regains control of the body. She ends up asking Blade for a duel and turns into Mao. It turns out they managed to find a way to coexist because Maria wished it, but their fight turns out to be strange. It seems that Blade is more interested in flirting with Mao instead of fighting, despite her being 5 years old. After having a meal, Blade and his friends return to their school. On the way, they want to get a delicious pudding, but there is a big cart stuck in the road. A lady is trying to move it. Ernest suggests that she should use the main road instead. Suddenly, Ernest notices that this lady is not just any lady, she is a centaur. Blade knows her, and her name is Dion. Dion wants to call Blade the great hero, but Blade asks her not to do it because it is a special secret. Ernest wonders if they know each other, and Blade hints that yes. Dion says that she has known Blade for centuries and tries not to reveal the secret that he is the hero. Blade then asks Dion what she is carrying in her cart. She says that she would love love to help her with it. Dion is grateful and wonders if the others with Blade are his team. Blade simply says that they are his good companions. Together, they help Dion move the special delivery of the king. Once that is done, the king has another task for Dion. He says that she will be a teacher at Rosewood School from now on. This surprises Ernest, but the king believes that Dion is a great choice to be a teacher. He also hints that Blade knows how talented she is. The advanced class then observed Dion with some strong metal blocks called Iron of the Gods in front of her. Dion uses a special power to break these blocks. Sophie is surprised because she thought these blocks should not be able to be broken. After showing her skills, Dion says that she is ready to begin the lesson, but Blade suggests that Dion tell everyone about herself first. Dion shares her name, Dion the Demon Lance. Ernest thinks for a moment. She wonders if she is the famous General Dion from a large group of soldiers on horseback. Everyone is amazed that such a skilled person is going to teach them. Ernest asks Dion if she could have met the great hero. Dion mentions something about having needed the hero a long time ago. This makes Ernest think about how old Dion could be. A little later, Ernest and Blade are walking through the town. Suddenly, Ernest sees a shiny thing flying over them. Blade is not sure what it is. Ernest tells him that it is a Cymurg, which is a special creature considered one of the 4 magical animals of their land. They wonder why such a creature is in the town. Blade mentions that as long as they do not bother it, the Cymurg should not bother them. However, the Cymurg suddenly goes after a cart. Blade reminds Ernest to stay calm, but soon they notice another Cymurg. Both assume that the two creatures could be a couple, and maybe they were looking for something in the wagon. Blade suspects that the king might have answers about this strange event. The story then changes to Ernest asking the king if he is hiding something. Blade explains to the king about the Cymurgs in the wagon, especially because Dion was near one at that time. Ernest is anxious to know what was so special about the contents of that wagon. It turns out that the king had taken an egg belonging to the Cymurgs. Blade believes that is why the creatures are upset. The assistant of the king suggests that the king clarify everything since the situation is tense. The king then explains that certain conditions are needed for a Cymurg egg to hatch. First, the egg needs to be at the same level as an ancient tree that has existed for 10,000 years. Secondly, the setting sun has to shine directly on it just when it is ready to hatch. He adds that the Cymurg parents are not the best at choosing safe places for their eggs, hinting that the egg might not have hatched if he had not taken it. Ernest understands that the king is trying to teach them a lesson. The king suggests that he is doing this as a training exercise for his students. He adds that the egg of the Cymurgs will not hatch unless they help. Therefore, the heroes need to protect the egg until it is ready to hatch the next day. Blade then shares his plan. They are not trying to defeat the Cymurg parents, but they need to distract them until sunset. The plan is to hide the egg, and when the time is right, they will take it to the top of a tall tower using an elevator. In this way, the egg can hatch safely. Blade encourages everyone to believe in themselves, but if they have doubts, he assures them that he believes in each one. As they begin their plan, they notice that the Cymurgs attack another wagon. The good news is that the people in that area have already moved to a safe place. Leonard tries bravely to defend himself against a Cymurg using his spear, but the creature avoids him. Clay manages to save Jessica from another attack. Although when Jessica tries to counterattack, her efforts do not damage the creature. Some students then use strong cables called Iron of the Gods, hoping to catch the Cymurg, but it is so powerful that it flies, taking parts of buildings with it. In the midst of all this, Claire is busy helping the injured and narrowly avoids an attack from a Cymurg, who comes to the rescue, but she fights the creature. Maria transforms into the Demon Lord and tries to repel the Cymurg, but her efforts are not effective. Meanwhile, Ernest powers up and confronts the Cymurg, which then counterattacks. The story then changes to the students moving an egg to a tower. However, the elevator they use stops halfway. Upon seeing the egg, the Cymurg gets alert. The group encourages Blade to protect the egg while they take care of the creature. As Blade moves toward the egg, he finds Dion. She offers to let him ride on her back to get there faster. Although the king told Dion not to help, she argues that carrying Blade does not really count as helping with her hands. Blade remembers the advice of his friend to trust them and move forward, which reminds him of old times. Dion comforts Blade, telling him that he is no longer alone. Although Blade once fought against the Demon Lord by himself, now he has many friends, including Dion. Trying to carry the egg to the top of the tower turns out to be difficult for Blade because the egg is quite heavy. With the help of Dion, they push the egg to the top where the king is waiting for them. Another Cymurg tries to snatch the egg, but the king intervenes. He tells the creature that a past favor will be returned with a new beginning. The king also mentions how a Cymurg rescued him once, and with the help of Blade, now he can return the kindness. Blade wishes the king had shared the story with him before. They notice that the sea creature is getting upset. Sophie uses her special abilities to calm the creature, while Blade tries his powerful dragon-devouring move, but it does not work, and both Blade and Sophie fall. Just then, the egg of the creature opens, revealing 2 baby creatures inside. Blade is baffled as to why the baby creatures look at him so closely, but Sophie thinks it is because they see him as a guardian. Ernest is amazed, joking that Blade now has a bigger family. A little later, the two ride on the baby creatures. Ernest is a bit nervous, but Blade advises her to just enjoy the ride, feeling happy for his new companion. companions. A week later, the school seemed to be all dark and empty. Blade walks through the hallway with his sword soaked in blood while remembering all the people, the ones he defeated on his way. There, he finds Sophie, revealing that she always wanted to go to a fight with everything against him. She wonders if she can beat him if she does not hold back her power. She activates her power to stop time and deals 3 blows to Blade, but after backing up, she notices that Blade does not even move. She wonders why she did not defeat him. Blade explains that she can attack him several times, but her blows do not cause him damage. Then he pushes her against the wall and reveals that he used a technique to momentarily increase his body hardness, and since she stopped time, the technique was active the whole time. Blade then runs his sword through her stomach and wonders why he keeps doing this, despite being a common person now. He gets up and yells at the king to stop what is happening, because he believes that all this is a spell or a trick. The king appears in a hologram and reveals that this is not a trick. This is virtual reality. I caught you there, right? The king is all happy about this new technology and tells Blade to use his real power because nobody will get hurt. The Demon Lord and Coup are having a blast fighting each other. The king also mentions that this is the best practical training form ever created. Therefore, his goal is to improve the skills of the students using this technology because they can fight to their death in virtual reality. Blade calls this a sick joke and asks if there is not a way to make it easier to distinguish between what is virtual and what is real. He thinks that this is too realistic and believes that there are some people who will return to the real world thinking that they are still inside the virtual reality, and those people can slaughter their own friends thinking it is fake. The king realizes that that would be a problem and flips a lever. The lever changes the background to something like Alice in Wonderland. The king then tells them to continue their fights to the death in this new environment. This is a literal free-for-all, where the last person standing gets the right to use the virtual reality however they want. Yes, you can finally get a date. Without many options, Blade decides to finish with this as quickly as possible. Leonard is running, happy to face Ernest, only to be cut in half. This girl became a literal psychopath inside the virtual world and begins to stab Leonard several times. After Leonard disappears, she begins to move, wondering where Blade is, talking about our boy. He is simply walking, observing how Jessica and Claire fight against 2 boys. The boys are all happy because the 2 never defeated them while they were still in the lower class. Therefore, this is a fairly easy job. The girls refuse to give up, and Jessica asks why the boy refuses to lose against them. The boys get embarrassed. You know what is in their heads, and Jessica takes the opportunity to attack and defeat one of the boys. Claire also hits the other, and they finally achieve their first victory against them. But there is a problem. Ernest is there dragging her sword, happy that Blade is in the area. She reveals that taking people's lives is fun. Seriously. First, she cannot contain her weight, and now she cannot contain her psychopathic vibes. She calls herself stupid for holding back all this time. Blade then remembers that he made a promise to her that he would cut her if she ever went crazy. Just one move of his sword destroys everything around him. Ernest runs against him, but Blade moves his sword at random to create a wind current that stops her. Seconds later, Blade wakes up in the real world with all the students looking at him. The king laughs, mentioning that Blade was the last man standing. As expected, Jessica and Claire do not even know what on earth he just did at the end, but at least they did not feel any pain. Ernest is crying like a little girl because she cannot believe she went into full psychopath mode inside. Blade even mocks her, mentioning how she laughed like a villainess. She yells at him to shut up because he is too powerful. Despite his claims of being common, the king continues to laugh, thinking that his brilliant idea is giving them the joy of youth. But Ernest complains about the trouble they have faced because of this. The king continues to laugh as expected, unreliable to the extreme. Blade approaches the king and begins to mess with the virtual reality system. The king tells him to enjoy his reward until he notices what Blade is doing. Blade is inserting data of fierce demons, creating floors with traps and all the things you would expect in an apocalypse. Blade then activates the system, and the king asks if those adjustments are not too extreme for him, but he tells him it is fine and puts the virtual reality system on the head of the king. Then, he tells the assistant of the king to make him respawn every time the king dies. She accepts and asks how long the punishment of the king should last, and Blade tells her to keep it until night. The students begin to leave the area, except the 2 boys who faced Jessica and Claire. They are literally depressed. Meanwhile, inside the virtual world, the king cannot believe his eyes as he observes tons of demons looking at him. During the meal, Jessica and Claire ask the boys why they are depressed. Ernest asks about the situation, and Blade explains that they were defeated by the girls. Ernest asks him why the girls won. Blade explains that Claire improved and Jessica gave it her all. The boys lost because they thought they were stronger and neglected their training. At night, Blade tries to comfort them because they simply lost once. They explain that he does not understand them because he never lost against a girl before. In fact, he never lost against anyone. They reveal that they cannot stand the situation because they did not want to lose against those girls because they like them. Blade does not understand the true meaning of those words and says that he likes them too. The boys are surprised, thinking that he likes Sophie or Ernest, but then they understand what he means when Blade says that he likes everyone. They try to explain what love is to Blade. One of them is interested in Claire, while the other is interested in Jessica. One of them explains that he likes Claire because she looks innocent, but she can also be ruthless at times. The The other likes how Jessica seems free and still likes her, despite literally saying that she belongs to a wildlife. Coup comes through the window because she heard everything and has the solution. They just need to become stronger so that the girls admire them. She explains that females are attracted to strong males, so they just need to train. The boys think it makes sense, but they do not know how they can become stronger. That is when Coup reveals that they just need Blade to train them. Meanwhile, the girls are enjoying the night, giving Ernest even more cakes to eat. This girl is hopeless, but their conversation changes to the other boys who do not talk to them. Jessica does not understand why they behave like that, and Claire suggests that they lose against them next time. But Sophie and Ernest think that will not work. Guess who is back? Again, it is Coup through the window. She tells the girls that males like strong women, and if the girls become stronger, the boys will all be after them. Jessica and Claire reveal that they have no interest in the boys. Mission failed. Claire then suggests to Jessica that they should skip training so that the boys become stronger than them, but Ernest will not allow it. During the next few days, the boys train under the supervision of Blade. Can anyone explain what on earth this is? After completing the training, there is another virtual reality competition. The boys promise that if they win against them, they will confess their feelings. They are paired immediately against the girls, while Ernest and Blade are the judges. Jessica runs immediately, and Claire follows her. The boys manage to stop their attacks and get the advantage in their counterattack. Ernest is curious and asks if Blade taught them how to use their fighting spirit, but he explains that he made them realize that they were already using it unconsciously, so he only taught them how to use the elements. One of the boys uses wind against Jessica, and the other tries to attack, but Jessica uses fire to counter and flings him toward Claire, who hits him in the face. Jessica then focuses on the other and uses ice to freeze him in place, followed by a lightning attack. This time, the boys accept their defeat and promise that they will become stronger than them. It turns out that all the girls taught Jessica and Claire how to use the elements, just because they were being trained by Blade. Ernest is all done because she expects Blade to love her, but she has no hopes that he will confess to her. Of course, Blade does not understand what on earth is happening. Claire and her friends see an android, capturing everyone's attention. Intrigued, Claire cannot help but find it adorable. Ernest, curious to know what has caught her interest, takes a closer look at it. Sophie steps in, revealing that the android has been around for about a week. When Ernest wonders if it is waiting for someone, the android displays an image of Blade. Meanwhile, Blade is absorbed in meditation when Q interrupts him. He explains that he is sharpening his fighting spirit because he can only access a fraction, 15% of his total power. This meditation, he believes, will help him accumulate some of that strength. Just then, Ernest and the team appear, with the android in tow. Without a moment of hesitation, Blade annihilates it using his signature dragon devouring attack. Confused, Ernest questions the abrupt action of Blade, mentioning that the android seemed to be looking for him. Blade clarifies that this android serves as a guardian and is designed to withstand repeated destruction. He reflects aloud if it ventured above ground specifically to find him. As if on cue, the android scans Ernest. The next day, a transformed android reappears in the arena. This time, it takes the form of a girl, claiming that its new look is designed to appeal to male sensibilities. That is when Claire adds 2 and 2 together, realizing that this must be the same android they encountered before. The reflexes of Blade kick in as the android lunges at him. He defeats it quickly using a flurry of his dragon-devouring attacks. Ernest criticizes Blade for overdoing it, but he reassures her, saying that the android will recover soon. Just as he predicts, the android recovers quickly. Ernest steps in before Blade can finish it off again. She suggests that perhaps the android, now in the form of a girl, just wants to be friends. Blade dismisses the idea, warning that guardians are always trouble, especially if they go rogue. The android clarifies its mission. It has been ordered to eliminate Blade and is currently in data collection mode. Claire invites the android to join their classes. The android warns Claire not to obstruct its mission, or she too will face eradication. Claire notices the word Iona on the clothing of the android and decides to use it as a name. The android corrects her, saying that it is not a name but an identification number. Undeterred, Claire insists on calling her Iona and suggests that they can collaborate on a strategy to defeat Blade. Iona accepts. The scene shifts to a group meeting, everyone brainstorming ways to defeat Blade, with curiosity piqued. The group asks why Iona is so determined to defeat him. Iona reveals that Blade has repeatedly trespassed against her and damaged her chassis. Blade defends his actions, saying that he had only entered the territory that Iona was guarding, and even had a master key for access. Iona counters that his biometric data did not match, which invalidated his key. When Ernest inquires for more context, Blade explains that he was visiting the nearby Royal Library of Forbidden Books to find out about Asmodeus. Iona interjects, stating that Blade broke in 13 more times, leading to Iona being destroyed 28 times in total and severely reprimanded by her supervisor, Mother. Blade retorts that Iona initiated the attacks, leaving him with no alternative. The girls collectively label Blade as heartless, causing him to become annoyed and storm off the scene, with Sophie trailing behind, alone. Blade confesses to Sophie that his intrusions were out of duty, part of his role as the great hero. He justifies his harshness toward Iona by saying that guardians like her do not die. They store their soul souls elsewhere. Sophie asks what he would do if destroying them actually meant taking their lives. Blade ponders this, admitting that he would have to rethink his actions. Meanwhile, Eliza theorizes that Blade is relentless with Iona precisely because she is indestructible. Ernest agrees to an extent, citing the frosty behavior of Blade. He even once threatened to cut her. Iona suggests shifting the conversation to more constructive territory. Seizing the moment, Eliza reveals a plan she has coined as the Independent Complex. The idea is to install the soul of Iona directly into her core, making her vulnerable to real death. Eliza speculates that this would cause Blade to hesitate, preventing him from ruthlessly destroying Iona again. Next, we see Blade and Iona both ready for combat in a coliseum. Before the first strike, Iona informs Blade that she is operating in independent mode, with her connection to Mother severed. Now, if she is destroyed, she cannot be repaired. Blade is bewildered, as he believed Guardians stored their souls elsewhere. Iona clarifies that her soul is currently housed in her own core. Severe damage would mean her permanent end. The battle begins with Iona launching a relentless onslaught of attacks. Blade tries to counter but hesitates, fully aware of the new vulnerability of Iona. He is caught between his instincts as a fighter and his moral compass, reluctant to unleash his full power. Iona exploits this hesitation, continuing her aggressive offensive. She manages to knock Blade down, commenting that his nature prevents him from harming what he perceives as an innocent girl. Iona implies that it is the overwhelming power of Blade that led to his downfall. He simply could not bring himself to hit her with less force. Blade retorts that she left him no room to even attempt less powerful moves. Blade concedes defeat, sending shockwaves through the student body. Nobody can believe that Iona managed to bring down the indomitable Blade. Later, the scene transitions to the cafeteria, where Iona hesitates to eat. Blade, noticing her reluctance, asks if she is capable of consuming food. Iona confirms that she can indeed break it down and convert it into energy. Eliza, observing the shift in the attitude of Iona, wonders if her motivation has waned after her victory over Blade. Iona opens up, admitting that she faces a problem she cannot solve alone. In the past, she would have sought counsel from Mother, her supervisor. The term Mother sparks the curiosity of Coup. Eliza surmises that Iona must be referring to the Mother computer that oversees her operations. Iona elaborates on this, saying that Mother typically assigns her new missions once she completes a task. However, despite re-establishing her connection, Mother has now locked her out. Deemed defective for abandoning her duties and severing the link on her own, Iona finds herself in a disquieting predicament. She is grappling with new insecurities in the absence of her guiding authority. She turns to Blade, asking if she could call him Master, but he flatly rejects her pleas. Iona drops another bombshell. If Blade does not accept being her master, her self-destruct counter will continue to tick. She explains that this built-in timer is a safeguard to prevent her from going rogue without supervision. The revelation shocks everyone. After a quick calculation, Eliza determines that they have roughly 84 hours before the self-destruct mechanism of Iona triggers. Faced with this ticking clock, Blade relents, agreeing to take on the role of Master of Iona if it prevents her from self-destructing. Later, the scene transitions to Iona serving food to Blade. She is dressed strangely, prompting Blade to question her attire. Iona explains that it is an ancient maid uniform. Now that Blade is her master, Iona awaits his next directive. Blade acknowledges the convenience of having Iona wait on him, but also laments the loss of his personal freedom. Just then, Sophie walks in and accuses Iona of copying her. From her expressionless demeanor to her obedient posture, waiting for orders. Sophie is irritated that Blade gives orders to Iona, but not to her. She proposes a challenge to Iona to see who is more deserving of the directives of Blade. Blade intervenes, asking both to refrain from causing any commotion. This causes Sophie and Iona to wonder if they should interpret his plea as an official command. Next, Blade notices something different about Sophie. She is wearing cat ears. She explains that it is part of her quest to establish a distinctive character. Just then, Iona appears, donning rabbit ears. Realizing they have had the same idea, the two decide on a staring contest as the next challenge. Ultimately, the standoff resolves nothing, so the scene shifts to an unarmed duel between Iona and Sophie. Despite the clear rule against using powers, both Iona and Sophie cannot resist and are promptly disqualified by Blade. Undeterred, they spend the rest of the day competing in various ways to serve him best. As night falls, they announce their intention to guard Blade while he sleeps. They agree that the person most fit to serve Blade should also be the one to bring him peace. As Blade drifts off to sleep, the girls keep vigil. Sophie offers Iona the option to rest if she feels fatigued, but Iona dismisses the need for sleep. They acknowledge that they have still not decided a winner, but Iona confesses that she is starting to care less about the outcome. For the longest time, she was alone. Her only visitor was Blade, Sophie relates, revealing that she too was isolated, valued only as the replica of Blade. Her connection to the world only deepened because of the presence of Blade. Iona realizes that Sophie has also become important to her. Both admit that they have enjoyed competing against each other. Observing their newfound camaraderie, Blade feels a sense of satisfaction at seeing the two get along. The next day, everyone everyone notices a new friendship between Sophie and Iona, along with a slight shift in the appearance of Iona. On the command of Blade, Iona reveals the counter on her screen. Though it is still ticking down, the pace has slowed. Eliza calculates that they have about 20 hours left. When Blade asks Iona what she wants to do with her remaining time, she opts to spend it with the group. To fulfill her wish, they throw her a festive party. Sophie encourages Iona to savor the moment, reminding her that this is all for her benefit. Iona revels in the joy of the celebration. However, Ernest cannot shake off the worry over the mysterious absence of Blade. She searches for him, but he is nowhere to be found. Finally, the party concludes, and Iona enters a barrier to prepare for her impending self-destruction. She bids farewell to everyone, expressing her reluctance to die and asking to be remembered. Just as the counter hits 0 and everyone braces for an explosion, Blade emerges from the ground. When Ernest inquires about his whereabouts, Blade explains that he went to negotiate with Mother and had to employ some brute force to persuade her. Iona announces her restored connection to Mother and the cessation of her self-destruct program. To the relief of everyone, overcome with emotion, she hugs Blade and bursts into tears. It is her part of the dramatic scene. It is evident that Iona is truly happy. A few days later, the Academy decided to hold a major event, a full-blown free-for-all, where students must showcase the results of their training. The catch is that Blade won it easily. I mean, Leonard is still standing, but let's face it, it does not matter. Everyone is cheering for him, mostly because they were defeated by Blade. To be fair, the skill of Leonard takes 50 years to charge, all to give him time to make his statement to Ernest, who did not even realize he was still standing. She even wonders how he survived this far. Finally, his skill finished charging, and he runs toward Blade, who simply teleports behind Leonard, making him fall and lose the event. Everyone walks away, mentioning that they expected nothing less from Leonard. The boy is discouraged on the ground, thinking that he does not need the others because he has Ernest. Speaking of the devil, there she goes, happy that it is time to eat. The boy shatters into pieces, literally. By nightfall, Leonard realizes how strong Blade is, but he wonders if Ernest will notice him if he defeats Blade and decides to repair his weapon. The next day, he sits on the bench being the typical useless boy, until Maria appears, asking if he wants to defeat Blade. He says that she does not understand. However, she mentions that she does not want to be behind Blade. She wants to be by his side. She thinks being defeated by Blade is frustrating, although she never faced him, but she swears that one day she will be strong enough to stand by his side. Leonard says that she must love him. She nervously dismisses it and quotes the words of the Demon Lord, "I will be the one to take his life." Leonard then asks if she wants to kill Blade. Her mood quickly returns to normal, and she even gets motivated. Maria mentions that she knows Leonard keeps comparing himself to Blade, so basically, she does not want him to stop trying to become the rival of Blade. She apologizes for her selfish idea, but Leonard is now determined to defeat Blade, just because he wants Ernest to notice him. Maria says that she will support him, only to be interrupted by Eliza. She simply calls them fools because they are idealistic people pretending to be friends. I mean, in reality, there is no way they can beat Blade. However, she suggests that with her help, they could find a way to defeat him. The Demon Lord now took over Maria and finds the idea interesting. Eliza has a realistic plan to defeat Blade, and they decide to call everyone for a meeting. Leonard explains to everyone that they must find a way to suppress a transcendent being like Blade. However, Ernest is more curious about why on earth Leonard is their president. Eliza does not even understand why Ernest is there. However, just like them, she has a goal: defeating Blade, at least once. Leonard maintains his speech of wanting to be epic, about how they are comrades in arms and those things. However, Ernest does not understand a word of what he is saying. In short, everyone has a motive to defeat Blade, except for Sophie. I guess she just wants Blade to be happy. Leonard then asks if anyone has a plan in mind, but they are all underhanded, like attacking during his sleep, poisoning him. Ernest thinks that that is cowardly, but Eliza answers by mentioning that Blade is a coward just because he is so strong. Most of them agree. Eliza explains it as if Blade were Godzilla, a superior being that they as humans are trying to face, so it is normal for them to use any method. Ernest only wants to fight him fairly because he only uses his sword. She asks if they could not challenge him with weapons that he is weak against, but Claire does not know how that differs from poisoning him or attacking him during his sleep. And since Leonard is a creep, he decides to follow Ernest and tells them that they should face Blade with the methods they see fit. So basically, he decides to make everyone promise that they will do anything to defeat Blade. Ernest decides to challenge Blade with the Spear of Leonard. However, Blade simply destroys it with just a flick of his wrist. Jessica is next. She decides to sneak up on him while he is sleeping. However, Iona is there to protect her master and turns Jessica into a barbecue. Jessica thought Iona was on their side, but she only acted as an automatic action. Leonard decides to go next. After fixing his spear for the second time, he promises that he will surpass Blade, who simply advises them to give up. Leonard charges his spear. However, it simply explodes in his hands. Yes, that foolish guy decided to fix it with duct tape. Maria decides to attack him while he is picking up his lunch and jumps on him like the Demon Lord. He simply throws his shoe at her and defeats her. Sophie challenges him with martial arts. However, Blade simply slams her back to reality. Claire also tries to attack him from behind while he is picking up his lunch, but he simply trips her to the floor. It is the turn of the useless boys. I do not know their names. They are not relevant. Their strategy is to distract Blade, telling him to look at the lady with no clothes on. But Blade answers, who cares? Yes, the lack of interest defeats them. Coup also joins in by attacking him while he is eating, but he simply defeats her by feeding her spicy food. Maria tries it again, dropping several sets of weights while pretending to fall. However, Blade simply catches them all. Ernest tries to beat him in rock, paper, scissors. She lost every single game, even at high speed. They try almost every type of challenge. However, they all fail. During the next group meeting, Ernest comes up with the idea of drawing straws. They will rig it, filling it with losing tickets so that Blade can taste defeat. But in reality, everyone has been so crushed that they forgot why they are doing this. Ernest still remembers. However, Leonard mentions that the goal does not matter. It is the process that has meaning. She does not care. She wants to defeat him. Iona then suddenly mentions the time Blade admitted defeat against her. They think about what they did during that time and how they can replicate it. They use the life of Iona as a hostage, so now they must find something that serves as a hostage to defeat Blade. The next day, everyone is in class when Blade notices that Leonard and the other two boys are missing. The girls explain that they are running some errands. Suddenly, three masked guys invade the classroom with swords. Ernest calls them terrorists, even though it is obvious that they are the other three. But Blade does not know what a terrorist is. Sophie explains everything to him, but he remains confused. The guys grab the teacher, who is the doctor of Blade, and ask her to collaborate. They take her away and tell the students to get out. Blade tries to follow them. However, Ernest stops him, explaining that they are hostages. Blade is confused, and the doctor plays along, asking Blade to help her. Of course, the girls get jealous because of the way she does it, and they all ask to be the hostage. Blade is confused and indifferent to the whole matter. The doctor decides to walk away because this must be the heat of youth. In the end, Ernest becomes the hostage along with the rest and asks for the help of Blade, who in turn asks Coup what on earth a hostage is. However, she does not know and says that it is non-perishable food. He tries to find a logic behind everything, but fails. So his thought is that they will take Ernest and the girls to keep them as food, but he still does not understand anything. Ernest begins to insult him, explaining that they are in danger, and the girls also begin to complain about it. In the end, everyone begs for his help. Blade tries to add 1 + 1, but he still does not understand anything. The girls keep begging for help and the boys tell him to surrender, but Blade simply calls the boys by their names and asks what they are doing. They are surprised and ask when he found out it was them. Blade already knew it was them from the beginning. They ask him how, and Blade explains that he could notice it by the way they walk. They throw their masks at Blade while insulting him. Blade then asks what they plan to do by taking the girls as hostages. Initially, they are confused, but they keep up the act. One of them says that they will use them as non-perishable food. Blade says that they should not eat their friends. The girls are confused because they think the whole scheme is working. The main problem is when the boy goes too far. In the end, he gets a massive beating from the girls. They ask if Blade will surrender, but our boy is confused and asks why. Leonard explains that they know he is weak against hostages because of the way he admitted defeat against Iona. Blade reveals that that worked that time, but it will not work this time. Leonard tries to raise the level of the performance by putting his sword on the neck of Ernest. Now they ask if Blade will surrender and what he will do. He simply pulls out his sword and uses one of his skills. Not only does the sword of Leonard shatter, but it also destroys the clothes of the boy. Ernest gets super upset and decides to use her fire to become Asmodeus and attack Blade. Everyone joins the attack, but they end up on the ground the next second. Blade asks what all this is, and Maria answers that it is pretending to be terrorists. Blade laughs and tells them that this was his first time playing a game of pretend, and asks about his performance because he does not know the rules. Everyone congratulates him and asks if the terrorists will appear tomorrow again. But it turns out that they continue with their meetings, mainly because Ernest wants to defeat Blade.